All right, so up next is Ryan Kovar. As he mentioned during lunch, he is not a data scientist, but he is going to be talking about some work that he's been doing building data sets for the rest of us to use.
Hello, my name is Ryan Kovar, as you said. For those of you who are hoping for a lecture on medieval morality plays, I'm very sorry to disappoint you. However, morality will feature heavily towards the end of this presentation. My name is Ryan Kovar. I've done cyber for a really long time. I worked at DARPA for a while, helping run a cyber counterintelligence fusion cell. I worked on things like Cinder over there. I helped out with some of that, various other DARPA programs. But mostly I'm a traveling man of cyber. That's what I do. And by that, I mean I have approximate knowledge of many things. I have done everything from pull Cat5 cable on an aircraft carrier, 5,386 feet, according to my performance review, to writing Python code, to helping set up global networks. However, I think one of my most valuable qualifications for this conference is from first grade. Yes, that's right, you can fail first grade math. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. So I want to set that up ahead of time because what you're going to hear is from someone who found out, even though in 7th grade he said, I'll never use algebra in my day-to-day life, I was very wrong. A lot can be done for people who are in what I would call the math muggle world. So going back to grade school, although I did poorly in first grade, I do believe almost everything you learned about how to present and give knowledge was taught in about 5th grade. So we're going to go over some whats. So what is the problem that I actually found? How do we bridge the gap between traditional data science and trying to solve these big problems versus cybersecurity professionals? And where can you find some of the answers I have? But before I do that, I affectionately like to call the 1:30 to 2 o'clock slot the yawn 30 slot. A lot of people at lunch. So everyone stand up for a second. Come on. I know this is not a pro for everyone, but shake it out, jiggle the legs. And once you're up, I want you to stay up for a second, all right? All right. If you have never done computer network defense or worked in a SOC or threat intelligence, please sit down. If you've never worked in a SOC, sit down, okay? I know I have some double negatives there, not good at English either. All right, if you are not a data scientist or a full-time mathy McMath person, sit down. Okay? Everyone's still standing, it's what I call a freaking unicorn. All right, and we're gonna talk about why this is important. So, what problem did I find? Security teams are often a bit dazed and confused about machine learning and AI. I'm gonna give you some quotes that I have from people that I met, customers as I've traveled the world, about machine learning. Can machine learning find the APTs on my network? That's it. Like literally that was what they wanted machine learning to do, just to find APTs. No qualifications. What do you mean 51% success rate is a success? That's mine, actually. Straight up when I found out that along with data science, if you can do better than average, you're winning. That was shocking to me for my world. They keep talking about types of errors. I don't care if there's 1 or 2 of them. Are you starting to notice a disconnect between what this conference is and your average cybersecurity professional working in a SOC? Or my personal favorite, I don't want to hear about statistics. This is a machine learning problem. These are all, honest to God, I wrote these down this year at Black Hat, DEF CON, and RSA. So what you find is cybersecurity professionals either think people who do machine learning and AI deserve to be in Princeton in 1945 celebrating success of giant math problems, or they're selling absolute bullshit. And it seems to be one or the other. It's in between the two. Vendors, and I put myself in this claim, are not helping the issue. Here's some things that I've documented. Machine learning can spot previously unseen malware instantly. Once again, no qualifications. Machine learning can detect intrusions before they start. I like to call this precog. I just imagine the algorithms floating in a pool of water and picking numbers out. Panda, right? Replace your tier 1 and tier 2 SOC analysts with algos. You know they're legit because they use the word algo, right? So, once again, this is where you leave your SOC. Computer network vendors are dazed, confused, and they are dumb, they are blind, and they are mute. They kind of turn off. So if you take someone who has an appreciation, who's worked in higher academic areas like DARPA, if you've seen the value of what machine learning can provide, you get to someone who perhaps is a bit of a math failure, but maybe a data science everyman, right? Security everyman. So last year, one of my best friends and colleagues, Dave Harold, and I gave a talk at SAN's Cyber Threat Intelligence Summit called The Hidden Empires of Malware. And I won't go over the whole thing, but the premise of this was, could we take features from SSL certificates, right? And there's a lot of different fields in SSL certificate, but could we take the ones that we've seen most abused by APT actors and find out if they're using them for malicious things using machine language? Our goal here was take the security everyman and walk them through the process step by step to see if we could actually use machine learning from things like machine learning toolkits, scipy, numpy, pandas, stuff like that, and run through. So we started off with this awesome question. Can we find APT groups with SSL certificates? No, we could not. That was not a very good question at all. So we crossed that one out. Then we called in help. We talked to Lauren. I think Lauren's in the audience somewhere. We talked to an actual data scientist. And she goes, basically, much nicer than I'm about to say, but she said, you guys are idiots. Your question is way too broad. Tighten it up. Can we find APT groups with specific fields from SSL certificates? Still too broad. Can we find bad SSL certificates using previously known bad SSL certificates? We're getting closer, right? You guys are like, okay, he's not completely dumb. Ms. Johnson maybe was not right, everything. Still wrong. This is what we ended up with. This was our hypothesis. Can we build a model to predict inclusion in the SSL blacklist? Turns out you can. We were very happy. The Homer Simpsons and myself were in the room. We were pretty excited. It actually worked. I still don't know what all those words mean, but I'm learning. But we were able to get a 91% success rate, which is better than 51, with a 4.9% false positive rate. So why am I telling this to people who already know what the hell I'm talking about? What I was able to derive the value of machine learning for me, and what I could talk to people about, is that it can help you reduce your data set. So when you start off with millions, and we started with 185 million SSL certificates, you multiply that by anywhere from 13 to 27 different fields. I won't say that's big data, but those are some big numbers, right? And you go from that to this. You can start finding the bears in your network, right? For those of you who are into threat intel, of course, we're referring to Russian bears specifically. Because the point of this whole talk, or this whole aspect, was we were looking for a very specific type of malware called PowerShell Empire, heavily used by APT28 and APT29. So we were able to kind of walk through this, and yes, we were able to find things. But the reality is we went from 190 million certificates to about 980,000, which in cybersecurity world is horrible, right? 900,000 tickets opened up in a SOC. But what this means is I can actually apply traditional methodologies that my SOC and my colleagues have been using for 20 or 30 years. 900,000 is approachable. 190 million is, we're not even gonna tackle that problem, right? So this was huge. So what I found was this wonderful quote from George Bernard Shaw: security data scientists and network defenders are two disciplines separated by a common language, okay? I've been hearing all these incredible talks, and every time I come back, I go, how do I actually do something with that? That research is phenomenal. I don't care. If I can't put lead on target, if I can't put bombs down range, if I can't block, defend, or help my network, everything we're talking about today doesn't help me in the field, right? So we need to bridge that gap. Well, I don't like coming up with problems without helping on solutions. It's just not how my mother raised me. So what I wanted to do was every time the next big vulnerability came out, whether it be Heartbleed, MITRE, or Spectre, all these different things that came out, can we actually do something with that? Because usually what happens is whenever these vulnerability comes out, the entire security research community is desperately trying to figure out how to get that data. So they either build horrible, horrible labs, or they share PCAPs, none of which is actually really encapsulating what that malware or what that APT approach, the TTPs are. So I came up with something called the Splunk Security Dataset Project, where we worked. I somehow convinced my company to host data sets in the cloud, where you just register, you get free access to it. And we started putting things in there for researchers to not only use themselves when new vulnerabilities come out, but also to teach people how to hunt through and how to look at all this interesting data. Right now we have two data sets. One is something I create called the Splunk Boss of the SOC, which is a completely created data set, but it's not synthetic. We stand up a whole fake company. We stand up foreign personas. We actually run through things like the MITRE attack framework and capture each TTP of a fake adversary we've created and do all the attacks step by step through, while having realistic data being done on the desktops, right? So we have that data in there. And then we also captured the Mid-Atlantic Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. They had PCAPs. Somebody ran that in Bro, released that. It's wonderful work. We host that as well. Of course, Bro, for those of you who've been keeping up on the Twitters, is now called Zeek. But at the end of the day, it's just wire data. And we run tutorials. So we actually teach people. If you're a researcher and you want to go through this, awesome, you have a great time. If you don't know what the hell you're doing to start with, we actually provide step-by-step. How many people have actually hunted through a web shell and seen the way that web shells maneuver through a network, get stopped, get blocked, you have to retract and come back in, right? We have that data, we've done the work, we show that in a tutorial. So with that in mind, something I've already accomplished, what if I took the Security Dataset Project and took this machine learning aspect that I'm now totally in love with, but I'm having a hard time convincing my peers around the world, how can we educate the security everyman to make this happen? So, hypotheses. 1, I would like to provide security datasets relevant to machine learning in a curated hosted platform. Right? I already have that one pretty much done. 2, work with data scientists, hello data scientists, to come up with achievable questions for the data so that we can start educating and helping network defenders around the world use the research that you're actually creating in applicable, helpful methods. 3, provide security practitioner-led tutorials of how to use this machine language against the data that they're seeing in their networks. These are not subtle. They're very much pointed towards helping out people who are doing their day jobs. But I'm not seeing a lot out there yet. So I'd like to do this. In this case, we do use something called the Splunk Machine Learning Toolkit. I work for Splunk. They pay for my hoodies and mortgage. But all this is an open source wrapper for numpy, scipy, scikit, stuff like this. At the end of the day, logs are logs and math is math. We can extrapolate a lot of different ways, right? So what's the first data set we're going to work on? Mirai. For those of you who are not familiar with Mirai, it was a botnet that came out about 3 or 4, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it just took the world by storm for any IoT devices that were open on Serpent ports. One of my colleagues, Anthony Tellez, who's a data scientist at Splunk, actually captured it in several honeypots that he had, which was very exciting. And he's actually already done quite a bit of work on this. So outcomes, the questions that I would like to create off of this is, can I create a model for botnets where if we apply this botnet for wire data coming into an organization, can we give a network defender a heads up? Like, hey, I'm not sure, but this is a +1 that this host fits this model for malware or for botnet data. Could we actually do things for botnets where we start modeling by families of botnets? I think this is all possible. I've seen the research, I've heard a lot about malware families, but converting that into something about wire data. All right? The second one, actually from Endgame. The Endgame malware benchmark for research. They did this phenomenal job releasing a corpus of known bad samples. I want to see if I can take that and create a model to apply against things that have run through tools like file analysis frameworks like Lycabos or Stoke, things like this that are modular plugins. And can I write a module within there using this, writing a module with a model based on the attributes that were defined in these features from the research and apply that so that network defenders, maybe it's not a perfect thing, but minimally they can say this file is more suspicious than other files based on this model. And that is usable, applicable machine learning for network defenders around the world. So I did all this work. I was really excited. Everything was going super well. Just one more thing, Mr. Legal Team. Anyone heard of this? Yeah. So for those of you who haven't really thought about the long-term consequences of GDPR for data sets, it's a Pandora's box. I have a wonderful legal team. I don't often get to say that, but they are really there to protect me and protect my company. At one point I had a conversation with him where he said, I don't really understand everything you're saying, but what I want you to do is if you say yes, know that you are holding your employment in escrow of being correct, right? If I'm wrong about European citizen data being in a data set, I will be terminated possibly, and I will cause my company millions of dollars of fines. This isn't a bad thing. What it did is it gave me the reality of what GDPR meant to our company, right? We have zero risk for inferring GDPR, and that's a damn good thing. That's not a problem. But what that meant is I really had to change my approach, right? Because originally, I was gonna bring in Enron data sets, start doing cool things with Enron. Well, guess what? Enron, although public domain for, 15 years now, has a whole bunch of PII in there. May or may not be European citizen. Can I gamble with my employment and my company's future? Absolutely not, right? Other things, and I even thought about this when I started doing more research into it. How many people have seen malware drop decoy documents? Can you guarantee the decoy document, in this case, perfect example, it does, have European citizens' email addresses and PII within the document? And if you're running an automated script, like the doctor earlier who talked about the black box testing, can I guarantee that some of those email addresses are not somewhere in the metadata that will come out on the other side? Things to think about. As we start creating data sets, this is a new reality that people need to be aware of. There are significant PII implications to creating data sets where you don't know all the outcomes. So, with that, where can I find it? It's a constant moving target. We're about to release, hopefully in the next 3 months, the Mirai botnet. Endgame I'm pretty satisfied with because there shouldn't really be any, the way the features are created, there shouldn't be any PII. I hope to be releasing these on a quarterly basis. We have a couple other ones pegged. ICS SCADA data, for example, from intrusion to explosion is something I'm looking at. A couple other things. We're hosting it here. For those who are interested, here is the link. Or you can just Google my name, Security, Splunk Research, Dataset Project, stuff like that. Takeaways. Network defenders are speaking a different language than data scientists. I see this all the time. One of the reasons I love this conference, it's approachable. I'm able to come in as someone who's interested in machine learning, but not an expert, and follow 95% of the discourse today. So it's a real credit to the speakers and the presenters and the conference paper acceptors, right? This is phenomenal. Anyone ever seen the movie Armageddon? Yeah, right? Like, why do you take miners and turn them into astronauts? Why don't you take astronauts and turn them into oil well miners, right? I kind of want to do the same thing here. I want to help network defenders learn the basics of machine learning so that they can actually apply it and have reasonable questions to ask vendors and to ask themselves as they apply new things. There needs to be a bridge between needs and possible. A lot of the research I've seen today is phenomenal research, but the long-term consequence is how do we actually create it so it's actionable? And I'm not talking about creating a product or selling, just helping out people to use this data and this research. Legal teams, as you start going through creating data sets, please take this from me and the 10,000 hours of work I've put into various different data sets. They are your really good friends. Make good friends with them. Find out about the implications to your organization as you ingest and test on data sets. And finally, beware of Pandora's data sets. They will sneak up on you and things in there that you are not expecting and you may be liable for. So with that, I know it's a little bit of a different talk and form and tone, but my name is Ryan Kovar, I work at Splunk, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, great talk on the data. A question about the data you're going to release. You talk about those malware. Hello? Talk about those malwares. Do you mix that with a lot of other noise or a lot of other, when I say noise, I didn't mean the regular traffic, I mean other kinds of malicious activity. Sure. Do you mix it together?
The question is, for the data sets that we release, is there noise or just all bad stuff, right? This is one of the hardest things I think we all experience here. The first version, we actually have 3 versions of Boss of the SOC. The first version was real data with then synthetically generated data around the back, right? And that was about 5 or 6 gigabytes. The second version, we did a lot of different data, and it was about 10 times the size of attack data, and then we also synthetically generated it back. That data set will be open source hopefully in December. Legalese, don't buy stock in what I said, all that sort of stuff. The third data set, which we just created and released, and we're going to run for a year in different capture the flag activities, has 0 synthetic generated data. It runs for a 24-hour period. It's about the same size as previous data sets. And what we did is actually had people sitting down, working on their workstations. It's a small, it's 9-person company that we faked up, but it's as realistic as I can imagine. We had a great call out from Microsoft, Ram over at Microsoft, who said it was the most realistic cybersecurity data set he'd seen, so that made us pretty happy. But, yes.
So, great talk, Ryan. So I really love the whole premise, and I want to flip it on its head to ask a different question. And when I go to a machine learning conference, there's like NIPS, or like I don't know, how many people are at NIPS this year? 10,000 people or something, and they're all machine learning people who are hungry for problems. But I think they probably they could be interested in security, but don't know the right questions to ask, like you're bringing up. So sort of flipping yours on your head. There's data, but with the data, is there some catalog of important, like, high-arching questions that one could ask of the data? to
Sure.
sort of point somebody in the right direction?
So absolutely, I think the question of, this goes back to the different language, right? Network defenders don't know what machine learning can accomplish for them, therefore they don't quite understand the questions to ask that are the questions solvable, which is why you have things like, can machine learning catch APTs? Maybe, sure, kind of, but I want to help network defenders get to the point where they understand the right questions to ask of data scientists, and vice versa, help data scientists find the right questions that need to be answered for network defenders. So I think there's an onus on both sides, and that we're just not speaking yet. We're not on speaking terms. I have not yet figured out where to put those questions, but I think conferences like this are the great start, and I want to see more people doing things like this to have that bridge. So.
Cool. So my question is for the Boss of the SOC dataset version 3 probably, did you also include any rules that an analyst team might have created like during that time
Yep.
to capture to do baseline?
Yeah, we did. Our rule of thumb is we try to do exactly what a SOC would do.
Awesome.
So there's alerts in there. There's, in this case, the Boss of the SOC 3.0 data set is primarily cloud focused. So it's a lot of Linux desktop, Azure, AWS, SMTP sessions, things along those lines. And then we actually have the internal Splunk mechanisms that are creating the alerts, or if there was a tool that created alert, that is also captured. So we do have that. The one bit of warning I will say right now, all that data is in Splunk because I don't get these hoodies for free. Got one question in the back.
Have you reached out to any Iceaxe to try to encourage sharing of machine learning data sets within those trust groups versus more traditional IOCs?
I have not yet. I'll be honest, my experience with Iceaxe is very varied. Some of them have a wonderful sharing community. A lot of them have what I would call the lurker problem, where 20% or 80% of the data is being produced by 20% of the participants. So it's an interesting idea I hadn't thought of, but it might be a good place to start looking.
Hi, great talk. I had really interested about the GDPR thing. I hadn't thought about it all before. Typically when lawyers get involved with things, I start zoning out. Are you thinking that you'll see malicious exploitation of GDPR in the future? Like, hey,
I
could
don't
clean
see
up-
how it couldn't be. So, I mean, absolutely. If I was an adversary and I know I could get away from, a perfect example of this is, will adversaries use GDPR against offenders? I hear a lot about, last year, like I said, we did this talk on SSL and how to find adversaries with SSL. And I had a lot of people come up and say, that's cool, but why bother? You can just use SSL decryption. So the first thing I offer back to anyone who says that is, do you do SSL interception for banking and healthcare? And of course, everyone says, no, absolutely not. That'd be a violation of PII, HIPAA, everything like that. Cool. One of the things I've seen APTs pivot to is actually popping very small Midwestern or very small banks. And suddenly, the SSL decryptors have a rule saying, hey, that's a banking website, hands off. So do I think that if I was an adversary, would I use GDPR and put in European PII? Why not? Seems logical.
Hi, is that SSL data also publicly available?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share the talk. The SSL data is available from Census, Rapid7, Rapid7 Sonar Datasets. Absolutely phenomenal resource. It's all available online. You have to do some work to kind of get into a parsable, usable form, but it is available.
Have you approached your legal team about the 2015 Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, which is a United States law designed to facilitate sharing cybersecurity information from private entity to private entity?
I have not, because of where we live in the vendor sphere. My goal is to make it as available as possible. If I worked for a organization that was working in a peer-to-peer organization, that's exactly what I would work through. And we do have one question up front for this gentleman, I think. Mm-hmm.
So what resources have been the most useful to you?
Sure.
If I want to start out in machine learning?
Sure. The question is, being new to machine learning and security, where do we start? Honestly, for, as I said, a first grade math dropout, OpenStats 101 was phenomenal. I actually got into statistics and machine learning because I had a project once and it was going really well and we were finding all the bad guys and we presented to our bosses and they didn't care. Somebody else came up, they showed a scatter plot and suddenly the world changed. And I said, okay, if I want more funding, I need visualizations. So then I said, cool, I'll learn the code for visualizations. So I learned that, and then I found out there's no point in visualizations if you don't have things to put in the visualizations. So then I had to walk backwards and learn statistics. Once I learned statistics, I was like, this is cool, but it's not scaling big enough. I should learn baby's first machine learning, and kind of went back through there. So I'd start with just basically stats 101 and then work up. as they say in Silicon Valley. If you're pitching to VC, it's AI. If you're pitching to Silicon Valley, it's machine learning. If you're talking to a data scientist, it's statistics, right? So.
Another question about SOC. So you mentioned a lot about SOC. Your experience, are there a lot more IoT kind of vulnerabilities, even like utilities?
No one cares about IoT. Honestly, I've never seen a SOC that's looked at IoT,
So
unless
why?
they're like a ICS SCADA shop. Most places can't even get visibility on every desktop, and IoT is really the next step. If you're in oil, natural gas, or manufacturing, you probably have a much better understanding, or at least have done a threat model to know that those things exist. But even ICS SCADA is a burgeoning environment. As my friends in ICS SCADA data say, the difference is when you screw up a sensor, people die. Which is, when I screw up a sensor, I have to rewrite a Python script, so a little bit of a different onus. Anything else? Cool. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Hope it was useful.